Thanks, Roseanne, and to the Academy for inviting me and also for the induction. I'm honored to be a part of your group. I'm not an expert in negotiation, but I have, because of those moves and a few different positions in the last several years, had opportunities to improve my skills and learn from my mistakes. So I'm going to share some of that with you. I also, in preparation for this talk, went through a lot of different other people's opinions about how to do negotiation, and there's not a lot of literature behind this in the medical world, which makes me uncomfortable. I'm much more comfortable talking about evidence-based topics than I am about things that are mostly people's opinion, but I'll put my spin on that. One phrase that came out through the things that I was reading is this one: yes, and I think that's a really important phrase when you're entering any kind of conversation about something that you would like to change, is what can I do to be successful? What do I need to be successful? And starting not with no, or this isn't working, or that was a mistake, but yes, and I'd like to be successful. I like to start by saying thank you, and this is something that I attribute to my laboratory mentor, who always said, start with the thanks, because people leave before you're finished sometimes, and you don't get to say thank you to the people who have helped you. So I have no conflict of interest related to this topic, and I'm not an expert, but I have participated in a lot of activities where negotiation is discussed. And the first of those for me was actually the AAMC Early Career Seminar Series when I was a new faculty member. And I remember coming back from that meeting all charged up about the things that I had learned, and going to my neighbor in the laboratory and saying to him, hey, I just went to this great seminar for women. It was fantastic. I learned a bunch of things, but I actually think everybody should go to it, not just women, because, you probably don't know any of this stuff either. And he was like, oh, yeah, like what? And I said, well, you're supposed to ask for a raise every time you meet with your boss every year and go through your evaluations. And he was like, yeah. And I said, well, have you ever gotten a raise? And he said, yeah, I've had 3 already. I was like, wow, maybe it is just for girls that we need to go to this thing. So I learned a lot from that first seminar, mostly to keep things to myself when I got home. The next most important, I think, activity that I was fortunate to go to, thanks to the medical school and the department, is the ELAM Fellowship, which is an executive leadership activity for women in academic medicine. And Pitt has a long track record of sending people to that. And then last fall, as part of a negotiation, John Riley sent me to the Harvard Physician Leadership course, which was a really wonderful experience. I also must say thank you to the mentors and chairs that I've had along the way, who've really taken me under their wing to talk to me in an honest way and teach me, as I'll show you later, that bosses are not the evil empire. They're actually people who want you to be successful, and so you shouldn't enter a negotiation thinking that it's a battle. I also like to think here at the University of Pittsburgh, Drs. Woodward, Thompson, and Weiss, all former ELAM fellows. Dr. Woodward is an expert speaker on negotiation, and I was fortunate to do a workshop with her on that, and that's helped me with some of the things I'll talk about today. Dr. Thompson is our vice dean, as you know, and she always tells me, I'm no good at negotiation either. It's okay. My dad is somebody that I really should thank, and I'll tell you a story about buying a car. And some of the things my dad helped me with during that. Our kids, all of us should thank for our negotiation skills, as Roseanne alluded to. Fernando, my husband, is a constant source of negotiation, but I'm a much better negotiator than he is, which will give you some insights into our marriage. The residents keep me on my toes on a daily basis. I basically have a negotiation every single day with somebody in the residency program, and my chief residents are the ones who really hone my skills at advising other people on how to negotiate as they run things by me every day about how they're interacting in their middle management roles. And then, of course, the Academy of Master Educators for the opportunity to put this together. I'd like to identify opportunities to practice really in your daily life and demystify negotiation, because I think that, as Roseanne said in her intro, most of us feel like probably we're not very good at it. And most people I talk to say, oh, I'm going to come to your talk because I'm no good at negotiation. And I thought the same thing until I started getting ready, and I realized that we do this all the time. And as physicians, we really do this a lot. Think about some of the negotiations you actually have in communicating with your patients. Don't think about it in that way, because I think negotiation has this adversarial connotation. Don't think of it that way. It can be a lot more fun and an important tool. So I'll describe a process and approach which includes some of the styles. And again, this is really a compilation of a lot of different things that I've read, webcasts and TED Talks that I've watched. They're very similar, and some of the pieces you may think are redundant, but I did that on purpose because I think hearing the same words in a different perspective actually is really helpful in getting the points across. I'll explore some common pitfalls and barriers and ask you to tell me about those as well, and then review some strategies that might improve the effectiveness of your own negotiations, and briefly recognize gender differences in negotiation. I'm a woman. I negotiate like a woman. I'm going to talk a little bit about those differences that exist, but that's a whole another talk and several web talks of its own. If there's some time, we'll discuss evaluation of negotiation process, because I know this is an education audience that also likes to evaluate the curricula that they put into place. There are a number of books out there, too many to count. If I want to find them, I just go into Asher's office because he has every self-help academic leadership book I can think to find, except for this one, maybe. Negotiating for Dummies I actually haven't read, but a lot of these other ones, at least the authors are really thoughtful and give a lot of information about different aspects of negotiation. I don't think any one text is a one-size-fits-all that covers everything you need to know, and most of them come from a business perspective, and some have a slant to academic medicine. And I think that's the other rub that I run into, is that as a physician, I feel that it's different. Our negotiation is often more collaborative, and we'll talk about those styles in a minute. So what are some examples of negotiation that you've participated in over the past few years? Job negotiations, anybody? Job? Title? Money? Salary? More? Yep, promotion. Okay, good. Days off? Part-time? Who thinks they're good at negotiating? Nobody? Nobody? Bob? Is he good at negotiating? Bob's good at negotiating. Well, that's when we can't say why. So why? You know what? When audiences full of business students are asked this question, half the room goes up. And they have a lot of reasons that they think that they're good at negotiating. So we physicians are a little bit behind. Here's some examples of things that I've done in the last 7 years with varying degrees of success or satisfaction. I changed that from success to satisfaction in the last 7 years. Buying a new car, actually this year, buying a house and selling one, actually twice, acquiring a new position, getting a raise, hiring a nanny, bedtime, chores, sleepovers, cello lessons. No Usher concerts for me yet. Reducing the cable bill, thanks to Bill. Choosing a movie, a restaurant, a vacation spot. Okay, any of these? You guys have done some of these now, right? Learners wanting to leave early, start late, change their clinics, and cover Jeopardy. These are regular negotiations. Yep, okay. And then curriculum changes. So those you don't necessarily think about negotiations, but Tom always tells me, everything you put into the curriculum, we need to take something out. We just don't have enough space to keep doing everything. So that's always a negotiation that we go through, sometimes as a group and sometimes as individuals. Yeah?
You missed one. Allotted dosage agreements.
Exactly. And I had to list on here to thank my dad because for this one, because I always say, I am not negotiating, because you just did. That's his favorite grandfather rule to say as I'm negotiating this bullet in particular. So step one is to prepare, and some negotiation experts will have a precept to that, which is assess. I kind of rolled all of that into the prepare part, and this is the most important piece of negotiation. If I had any take-home message from the things I learned from preparing this, it would be to say, prepare, and prepare again. That will keep you comfortable when you're sitting in the negotiation. So you have to first start with a self-assessment. What is it that you need or want or are trying to get? A lot of people, I think, sit at the table of a negotiation having not even really thought about what are their goals. And that's a huge mistake, because you can't play the negotiation game at all without knowing what your actual goals are and what your strengths are. So the self-assessment includes that. The BOTNA we'll talk a little bit more about. And then being mindful of the other side, I think, is the other lesson that I would ask people, I guess, as you transition from being a person who's asking for things to a person who's being asked to give things. It's really important to remember that the other side also has some interest. So self-assessment is one of the hardest things to do, I think. You need to sit down and say, what's the value of some of the hidden things that you do? Not just the things that are listed on your CV, your titles and roles, but how do you claim value for what you do? What about the mentoring activities, the organizing activities, the contributions that you make to the institution, the department, the division, your society? Work it into your annual review, even if you're not asking for something, because I'm not sure I want to believe that advice that you have to ask for something every time you meet annually, but work into your annual review, highlighting some of these things that maybe are not on the piece of paper, the contributions that you're making silently, but that are really important. Connect what's good for you with what's good for the negotiation. So what are the things that the negotiator, the party that you're meeting with, also is interested in? I think making that connection from the beginning is a way to have this feel like it's actually a conversation about how we can all be successful rather than a conversation about what you want from someone else. Make it a habit to reflect on the things you do well and what you bring to the table. And this is something that every course that I mentioned earlier in the list really hit home. Take some time. I have it blocked on my calendar, and I'll tell you in the last year that I've had it blocked on my calendar, I've only done it once, but it's every week, a time at the end of Friday to say, what are some things that went well this week? What were the skills that I brought to the table to make that go well? And what could I have done differently? Now, weekly, doing that is something that will certainly not be a bar that everybody can keep. But sometimes doing that is really, really helpful. And it can be little stuff, and it doesn't have to be just work related, because you can learn from the skills that you have in negotiating the cello lesson and apply that to the work activities as well. So reflect about the things that you do well. Write these things down and dissect the reasons that you're successful. So ask yourself, why did that go well? What is it that I did that was really good? And if you can't do that for yourself, find a friend and talk to them about it too, and say, let them say, wow, when you actually change the focus of that conversation to focus on the other person, that was a really good way to get that going. I think that you did a nice job figuring out how to make turn that into a success. So set your goals. And another thing that everybody thinks about when they hear the word negotiation, and this is what the business folks teach us to think about a lot, they hear the word, they think salary, they think dollars. We're doctors, we get paid pretty well. I'm not saying that your salary is not important, but don't think about only the salary. Think about other things that make your work life good. So the space that you're working in, this is particularly important for people who have research activities, so laboratory space, clinical space for your clinical trials or for examining your patients, a title that might be important to you and that might help you get a national position, protected time, not term. So protected time may be very important to you to balance some of your work-life activities. Opportunity, so an opportunity to be on a committee, an opportunity to represent the institution somewhere, an opportunity to sit in on certain meetings even might be something that is useful to you and is an easy ask. If you say, I'd really like an opportunity to sit at the division leadership meeting, or I'd really like an opportunity to present to them some of the things I'm doing, that's an easy thing for your boss to give you right off the bat. No skin off their nose, and it starts the tone of give and take really well. Mentorship, asking for somebody to officially want to talk to you on a regular basis about the job that you're doing. That, I think, is particularly important for folks who are taking on new roles or activities. So I'd really like for you to be willing to mentor me in this new role. Coursework or career development, I think I mentioned that in the first slide. One of the things that I asked for was an opportunity to go to some of these courses to learn some things, and that's usually expensive and it takes time away from your work. So for a department or a boss to sponsor you for that is a really big deal, and it opens up opportunities for networking. Flexibility. Maybe you would like the ability to change your schedule and be flexible. We know that burnout in physicians is tied to lack of autonomy and flexibility, so negotiating for flexibility is something that you can ask for. And I haven't quite been brave enough to ask for a treadmill desk, but I know that people do. Know your key flexion points. So this is from purchasing, and I'm going to tell you guys a little story about a Jetta that I bought in 2000. But I don't know if this diagram. This seems like so self-explanatory when I look it up on the internet and try to figure it out. All you have to do is look for zone of possible agreement and you'll get this whole thing. So the zone of possible agreement is obviously in the range of both the seller and the buyer. The stuff out here about your desired price, I want to pay $100,000 for my gorgeous new home, is not going to be in this zone of possible agreement. And so this overlap is where everybody might find something that they like. Unfortunately, you don't want to be here if you're the seller in the worst case scenario, and you don't want to be here if you're the buyer. So it's really like a sweet spot somewhere in here. So in January of 2000, I was looking to trade in a used car that I had been driving since it was a 1988 Toyota, and the clutch really needed some work, and it had 120,000 miles on it. And I had never bought a car before. And I talked to my dad a little bit about it, but he wasn't living in Atlanta where I was. And so I had to think about a lot of negotiation terms. And I went to Edmunds.com. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So I had to figure out my best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or your BATNA. And anything you read about negotiation, we'll talk about this. It's really fun to think about it. What will happen if you walk away? Like, what would be the worst, thing if you walked away from the negotiation table? It could be the status quo. Actually, I'm in a great place right now. I like my job. If I were negotiating for something, nobody would really be able to push me too much on my BATNA, because my best alternative is to keep doing what I'm doing. Another position, so if you have another job, that might be your best alternative to the negotiation that you're currently going. A step back could happen. So your best alternative, I'm doing too much and I really can't keep doing this, and so I'm gonna back down, would be another possibility. No job. I'm so tired. I can't stand it. I could just stay home and shuttle people to cello lessons. That's not the best alternative. Try another day is another example of what could be your next alternative. So I don't make this happen today. I'll come back in a few months or another year. So why is it important? Having a BATNA allows you to invest less emotional capital in the process. If you know what the best outcome is going to be, even if the negotiation doesn't go the way you were planning, you're not going to be all hot and bothered about how it's going. You're going to be calmer because in the back of your mind, you know what this alternative could be. It avoids ascribing better qualities to the offers than are true. So when people are talking to you and you don't know what the best alternative is, you may fall victim to their persuasive conversation with you. You know what? You really need that stuff that goes on the outside of the tires to make it shiny. That kind of stuff sounds really great. No, my best alternative is actually something different. It involves exploration of the goals prior to the start. So this goes back to that preparation piece, really thinking about, what do I want to get out of this? Sitting down by yourself before you walk in front of someone else. I like to please people. So when I sit down with other folks, if I'm not very solid about what my goals are and where my best alternative might be, I'm really susceptible to wanting to make them happy on the other end of the table, no matter what they say. It makes winning less important. It's more about the things that you're getting, the goals, the negotiation, rather than the particular, I have to have this thing. I'm not emotionally attached to winning the outcome. And it allows you, therefore, greater flexibility. So back to 2000, with the Stone Mountain Volkswagen dealership, I prepared. I went to Edmunds.com. I watched videotapes about negotiation. I had a Palm Pilot where I wrote things down. These numbers are not quite right because I don't have my Palm Pilot. But I thought Edmunds.com tells you all that stuff, the zone of possible agreement, the sticker price, what it's going to be, what the markup is. They even tell you all the tricks that they're going to do. I had a trade-in price, which is pretty high for that $125,000 thing, but I went to Blue Book to figure that out. Who knew there was all this information out there? I wrote it down. I did the math. I found my resistance point, which was going to be about 16.5. Their asking price was ridiculous. It was 19. And my BATNA. Go home with this Toyota that I already own. I have the clutch fluid in the trunk in case it kind of leaks out onto the road on the way home, and I can fill it up. I know how to do that. Thanks, Dad. I learned how to do that. Okay. So some of the other things that they show you on Edmunds.com are the flip side of the pancake. What is the car dealer going to do when he's talking with you, or she, I guess? Mine was a he. and I remember it very well. And they're going to take your keys so that you can't have this BATNA to go home. Oh, we're going to check out your trade-in and keep the keys. Really? They do that? Okay. So take 2 sets of keys. They're going to tell you that there's a fee that they add to the end that they can't do anything about because it's required and it's, part of the deal. Okay. So I practiced all those things with my friend before I went out there, my girlfriend. I taught her how to be the car dealer, and we practiced and we went out there. This is not that big a deal, right, guys? Who cares about $500, And I drove out there on a Monday evening, close to the closing time, so that I could leave and come back the next day if I wanted to, part of the strategy. So this is all about the preparation. Everything happened that Edmunds.com told me he was going to do. He took my car keys and said, we'll be back, we're going to assess your thing. And I said, don't lose them. And he stopped for a minute, and then he kind of chuckled and went to the car, and I jangled my other set. Okay? We settled on a price, one that was in our zone. It's not the goal that I had, but not the sticker price for sure. I got a sunroof that I wanted. He tried to sell me some under the thingy rust proofing, and I said, no, thank you. And then I went to the back room. You know where the back room is, right, guys? Everybody knows the back room. So I went to the back room with the woman who was going to do the paperwork, and stamped on the sheet was a $200 fee for miscellaneous. And I said, oh, what's this here? Oh, that's what we pay for the people who are getting your car ready, and, it's to keep the organization running. And I said, oh, well, I'm willing to pay $75 for that. Edmunds.com told me I was going to have to pay $75 for that, but $200 is too much. And they said, well, it's on the form, it's stamped on there, we can't change it, that's how it is. And I said, well, you can take that $125 off my trade-in, put it onto my trade-in price then, and we'll be even then. She's like, well, the guy who assesses the trade-ins is not here. What's my BATNA? Go home with my Toyota Camry that I came with and my clutch fluid in the trunk. Okay, well, I'll come back tomorrow when the guy's here to assess that. I'm talking about $125, ladies and gentlemen, but it's 2000 and I am a rising PTY3. That's a lot of money to me. And more importantly, I wasn't emotional because I was pretty emotional. But I was trying not to be emotional because I really, really wanted to do this right, and I had prepared. So I said, well, I'll go. So she called the guy who's selling it to me, and he comes in and he says, Jesus. Said, who taught you how to do this? And I just smiled really big, and he said, give it to her. And then as I was leaving in my new car with my sunroof open at 9 o'clock at night from the Stone Mountain dealership, he said, tell your daddy you did a good job. And I called my dad on the way home from my new car, super happy, because I had prepared. I knew what the other side was going to do. So know what is available. Find out what other people who are like you make, have, do with their time. Talk to them about it. People are willing to share that stuff, although we pretend like we're not. Know what is needed and valued. What does the department or the division or the institution need? Think outside the box. What are some things that could make you more successful? Remember, the title of my talk is Yes and. What are the things that I could use to help me do a better job? Plan for the long haul, not just the day after your meeting. Our relationships are really important in the organizations that we work in, so think about what it's going to be like the next day when you're working with folks that you just negotiated with. One of the evaluations questions that they use at the Harvard Business School when they're talking about negotiation is, how is the person going to feel working with you tomorrow? What are they going to feel after they've hired you? They're going to want you to come and like you or not. Use resources. The AAMC has a lot of resources. You have faculty advisors. There are examples on the web. There are tons of videos, let me tell you. There are other job offers that you might have had or that you have or someone else has. Interview of outsiders. So I learn a lot when I interview people here who are coming to look at jobs about what they're interested in and what they do at their own institutions, what they think is valuable, some things that they've asked for in the past, and things that they think are important in a good job. Committee work that you do is another place where you learn a lot of things about what's valuable to the institution. When I sit on committees, I'm listening to the initiatives that are happening around and thinking, how would I contribute to those kinds of things? And that would help me when I'm talking to a boss about the things that I bring to the table. Be observant and be excellent. I think the best line, and I tell this to the residents, how do you get what you want? And the medical students who come to meet with me about how do they get into a residency that they want, just be good at what you do. That sounds really simple, and like kind of cliche advice, but it's really the place where you should spend the most of your energy. And I don't need to tell this to that group. I just wanted to share that's what I tell other people. So bosses are not all mean, and they are not your father. Okay, this second part, they are not your father, is really important. I just told you guys how attached I am to my dad. And so if I make somebody in front of me the image of my dad, it's really hard for me not to disappoint them. So it's better for me to have this image of them, but I'll tell you, most bosses actually want the people who work with them and for them to be successful. And so the reason that they don't give us what we want has a lot more to do with what their restrictions are than with what they think about our worth. I mean, I think a big mistake that you make when you're sitting with a boss in a negotiation is to believe that they're not giving you something because they don't like you or they don't think you're doing a good enough job, or you haven't been living up to expectations. And that's where we're putting all these father things in there. What they're really thinking is, wow, you're really awesome, and I wish that I could make you better. And I wish that I could give you everything that you want, but I can't. So understand the priorities. The person across the table from you, and this is all part of preparation. Before you go in there, think about their side. Think about the institution's priorities, the school, your boss's own priorities, and how do your goals that you did in that last step fit in with their goals and priorities as well. This is my favorite picture. The chief residents have it in their office. It's no matter how thin the pancake, there's always two sides. So think about the perspective of the person that you're going to be sitting with. Know their negotiation style. Know your own style too, but it's less important to know your own style than to know theirs, because theirs is the one that matters in this situation. Yours needs to be malleable to the one that you're sitting across from. So some people, and think about people that you've negotiated with. Some people are amiable, and they value the relationship and the feelings of the person they're sitting across from. Some people are drivers. They value bottom line. They like to win. I sit across from people like that sometimes too. Some people are analytic. They're cautious, methodical, organized. My boss in Atlanta, who was my mentor for a long time, and then my boss, is very much like this. He's a wonderful person, but nothing goes fast. It's very methodical. He's a scientist. It's very, very organized and methodical. I send him an agenda the night before at 8:30 p.m. when I know he stops checking email, so that it's the first email that he sees in the morning when he arrives. Very analytical. Some people are a combination of styles, and they're very flexible. For the person who's coming into the office wanting something, so if you're the person asking, that's a great way to be. For me, I find if the person on the other side of the table is flexible, that also kind of is unpredictable. So I prefer to negotiate somebody who's one of those top three things, because at least I know what I'm managing, rather than somebody who's flexible because they might be better at at negotiating. There are some other style categories in the literature that I think are important to go through. These are not all of them. People make up all kinds of different style categories for this. Competing are folks who are results-oriented. They're self-confident and assertive, and low on the cooperative scale. And I'll show you a diagram with this in a second. Some are avoiding, so they're passive. They avoid conflict, and they have little attempt to get a solution. You've been in negotiations like this, and you leave like, where are we now? What are our action items? How am I going to come back to this? I'm not quite sure. They are low assertive and low cooperative. It's tough to negotiate with avoiding folks. Collaborative people are open and honest communicators, and they have creative solutions. They suggest alternatives. They're high on the assertive side and high on the cooperative side. Those are the best types of negotiations to be in, because it's usually focused on the we outcome, really a win-win. The accommodating folks are ones who like to maintain relationships, downplay differences, and want to satisfy the needs of others. Low assertive and high cooperative. This one, not to generalize to everyone, is one that women do more frequently. The relationship is more important to us in general, and so that lacks assertiveness and is highly cooperative. We'll see how the outcomes go with that. Compromising is somebody who finds the middle ground, splits the positions and trade-offs, moderate, assertive, moderate, cooperative. I used to think this is the best way for everybody to be, but I'll show you in this diagram, in a second, that actually isn't necessarily the best way, because the middle ground is kind of like, can sometimes be sort of lose, instead of win-win. It's not lose-lose, it's just kind of. And that's not as great as let's win it altogether. So how do you determine people's style? You may be saying, well, I'm going in to negotiate with somebody, but I have no idea what they're like. That's not true. Think about the people that you sit across from who are your bosses. Maybe in the room, I'm your boss. Ask other people, so what's their style? You've watched them in meetings, you've had other conversations about them. They're going to be a little bit different when the rubber meets the road in a true negotiation, which is always shocking to me. But ask other people, what's it like to talk to them? How do you win? I always ask Missy, how do I go to Wishwa with this? She knows by watching him for, decades how to prepare for that. Listen to other people's experiences, listen to the things that come out of their mouths. I listen at division meetings, I listen at faculty meetings. What's priority number one for Mark Gladwin? Everybody in the room who's heard him talk 3 times in the last 6 months can tell you what those are, right? Primary care, research, geriatrics, right? All right. Ask questions. So ask questions when you're in the meeting as well. I was flying somewhere not very long, a while ago, over 2 years ago now, and my husband was negotiating for something, and this was in the magazine. You guys have probably seen this in Sky Magazine a million times, this cookie that says, you will not get what you deserve, you will get what you negotiate. But you have to know what you want in order to get what you negotiate and deserve. So here's that diagram I was talking about. On this side is concern for relationships. So high concern for relationships, low concern for relationships. And then this is concern for the outcome. What are we getting out of this meeting? If you have high concern for the outcome, but low concern for the relationship, the person you're negotiating wants to win at any cost. That does not feel good if you're on the other side. This is the best one that I was talking about earlier. So high concern for the relationship. We're going to work with these people for the rest of our lives. And high concern for the outcome. We love our goal. Our mission is to train the best generation of physicians in the world. And so we want to have a great outcome. We're going to creatively problem solve so both parties win. This is that compromise box where I used to think, well, that's the good way to do it. I give a little, you give a little. It's not really that great if you're splitting the difference because you really could move into this category. Now, it takes 2 to tango, and so you want to have somebody across the table who also is that way. But I'll tell you that if you frame things in that relational way, you're often going to be able to move the other person away from this lower concern to a higher concern for the relationship and more over in that direction. Most people are concerned for the outcome. So this is another thing that Wishwa always tells me, which is keep calm, and he probably tells you guys all the same thing. But I found this one that says keep calm and prepare yourself, because as I mentioned, I think the preparation for the negotiation is the most important part. Step 2 after preparation is the actual negotiation itself. You want to be respectful of the people in the room, and that goes without saying, but again, I have to remind the residents of that sometimes too, and myself, depending on how emotional I am before I go into the negotiation. You have to be respectful at the table or nothing will go well. Anticipate questions and concerns, but wait for them to be asked. So if I go back to my car story, I was anticipating all night, where's that extra service fee? Where's it going to be? I haven't seen it yet. If I had asked earlier, it wouldn't be a mistake for me to say, what's the extra service fee? Because if he told it to me up front, I would have had to factor that into my negotiation. Keep my mouth shut until the end. I'm anticipating that's going to come. I prepared that I'm going to address it, but I didn't bring it up unnecessarily. Maybe they're not going to bring it up, and you should just keep it to yourself. Learn from the meeting. Listen and learn what the priorities are of the person who's sitting across from you. I think another big challenge or mistake that sometimes happens is to go in thinking it's all or nothing right now. I got to get this done. When I walk out of here, it was either a win or not. And what you should really be doing is thinking about it as a process so that you're learning actively from the conversation that you're having. Ask lots of questions. It keeps you open-minded and it keeps you relaxed. Think about feasibility. Be willing to engage in brainstorming before you commit to anything. Keep your emotions in check and stay out of the basement. Be honest and remember, this is a process, not just one meeting. So what's the basement? I'm actually talked to Wishwa about this yesterday because I had gone to the basement. And that's something that I learned in the business class that I went to. Going to the basement, anybody know what going to the basement is? It's a couple people. All right. You can imagine it though, right? So a resident emailed me and said, I'm going to leave early to go to my fellowship. So I arranged to not be in the ED for the last 2 weeks of June. Yeah, exactly. You guys heard Jen laugh over there. That's not what I did. I went to the basement, right? I opened the email and I went to the basement. It's like, you are kidding me. I sent an email on March 22nd. In fact, let me find it right now. That said, everybody needs to tell me, you need to plan in advance, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I went to the basement. That's all right. I was in the basement in my office, not in the basement on my email, not in the basement in my conversation back with him. I might have shared the basement with the chief residents for a minute. And then I thought, how can we make this work? What are the consequences? What am I going to do now? So stay out of the basement. If you feel yourself going to the basement, what does it feel like to go to the basement? Your stomach hurts. You might feel nauseous. Your heart rate goes up. You might get a little sweaty. I might feel like I might cry or I'm flushing. If you're a flushing face, you know it. I'm fortunately not usually. So take a deep breath. Ask to get a drink of water. Put your hands in your lap. Watch your posture. Put them back down on your chair if you're in the basement. I would like to say that when I went to the basement earlier this week that I did all of those things. I didn't. It's not perfect. But I asked Wishwa, I said, Wishwa, I went to the basement. And he goes, what's that? Wishwa never goes to the basement, right? He's always looks like he's on the top floor. He didn't send me an email later that said he lived in a basement apartment when he was in St. Louis, and if it floods, you should get out. So here's some suggestions. I told you that a lot of these things are said over and over again in different ways. There's actually a study that was done and published in 2007 about what faculty think about negotiations and their advice about how to be successful. I'm not going to go through this whole table, but just number 4, reviewing negotiation as an ongoing process, not just one meeting. End each session politely and comfortably. After a negotiation, email the other party summarizing the session to be sure you are both on the same page. This is something that comes up a lot in the reviews that I did about medical negotiations and academic medicine negotiation. It doesn't happen as much in the business world. They are reluctant to put stuff on paper or in email. But we in medicine advise doing that more frequently, just to make sure people are on the same page. This also, they say, provides documentation of the negotiation. Sometimes it's an opportunity to clarify things that were missed. And believe me, if the person that you are conversing with doesn't agree with your summary of how the negotiation went, they will let you know. And so then that opens it up to have another meeting to discuss. Again, there are lots of different, you see that these themes are very similar. There's a professor at Harvard Business School called Deepak Malhotra, and his students call him the D. He gets lots of teaching awards for his negotiation course, and they do a lot of role play, which I wasn't going to make this group do today. You're welcome, Tom. But some of the things, but I listened to a couple of his talks online, and one of the things that I thought was really important to highlight from his list of 15 tips for how to do negotiations well is that they have to be able to do it internally. So sometimes, again, this goes back to the boss not necessarily thinking that you're bad or that you don't deserve what they're giving you, but they just can't do it. It doesn't fit. They've promised someone else something. They've promised their own boss something else. Everyone has a boss. It doesn't work with the budget that they have or with the goals that they have or with the hiring freeze that's going on that you don't know about. There are some constraints. So thinking about what those might be and giving an out to the other person to negotiate for something else rather than closing them off at the time that you're having that conversation is important. I know you might not be able to do this right now. I hope that in the future we might be able to revisit it. The help me understand word phrase is recommended a lot by these business guys. And it sometimes goes well and it sometimes doesn't. We'll have to talk a little bit more about how women and men are different. So I would just try to figure out how you can understand rather than sometimes just asking that right out, and maybe reflecting later. As I tell Diego, don't ask me a question that you already know the answer to, okay? Why are we in the grocery store is not an appropriate question. Stay at the table and stay in touch. Don't walk away. Even though the meeting's over, say hello in the hallway, keep emailing, keep doing the things that you're supposed to do, stay in touch, keep asking questions and revisit things. Avoid ultimatums and ignore them. I thought this was a really nice part of his talk. So avoid ultimatums, I think, makes sense. Okay, don't ever say, do this or else. I mean, that's really, that's rude. But also, some people might say them to you. So when people are in the basement, they say stuff like that. I had some of that said to me before. Well, you just aren't doing this, and therefore you can't, you're not going to be able to teach that class. His advice, Dr. D, the D, said, ignore those. If you engage in them, the other person is going to have to keep it in order to save face. Ultimatums come from the basement, so ignore them when people say them. That gives that person an out, and you don't have to deal with the ultimatum, and they don't have to make good on it. Okay? Everybody ignore the ultimatums. This was a really strong, good piece of advice that I thought he gave. Don't make assumptions about intent. I remember this piece of advice actually coming from a wedding shower that I went to. One of those puzzles at the wedding shower where you're supposed to write something on the blank puzzle piece and put it down on the table, and then everybody puts the puzzle piece together, and it's got a whole bunch of pieces of advice for the new bride. And somebody said, never assume that he knows what you're thinking. Wow, that's a really good piece of advice. Don't make assumptions about the intent of the person who's sitting across from you. You don't know their intent. We do that a lot when we read emails, right? Ugh, I know they really meant to get me with this one. You don't know that, so don't make assumptions. It makes you emotional. It puts you in the basement. It's not a good way to be. All right. Another important expert, I think, on negotiation is from, she's retired now or is a emeritus, is Deborah Kolb, and she's written a lot of books on negotiation. And she talks about turning small wins into big gains. So getting things off the ground, she mentions making sure that your value is visible, that you have something they want. And I mentioned this earlier. Bring those things up in a time when you're not negotiating. Have another opportunity available to you. That's easier said than done, especially for junior faculty. I don't think that we always have something else that we could go to, but that certainly makes you have an upper hand in negotiation. Understand where they're coming from. We went through that quite a bit. And then dealing with resistance is kind of her addition, I think, to the negotiation literature or conversation. She talks a lot about moves and counter moves and things that people do to put you on the defensive. They might criticize your style. When you come in here talking like that, you are not being reasonable, or you didn't prepare appropriately, or you haven't thought of all of the things that you should have before you came. They may demean you, actually, and say, you're not good at that, or you're not thinking smartly. They might appeal for your sympathy. Gosh, this is such a hard job. I really need your help. I'm a victim to that one, right? I need you to do this. They may flatter you. You're so great. You're the only person who could do this. I can really count on you because I know you're awesome at talking about negotiation. So why don't you be the one to do that? Then there's some turns that you can do. So interrupt the process by silence. Just sit there. That's super uncomfortable. Somebody's going to fill it. Don't make it you. You can ask a question. Tell me how that would, how do you see that playing out? What would that look like? Tell me more about the things that you might need for me to do in order to make that happen. Yep.
Like most of what maybe it's a lawyer, often this negotiation assumes that the other person doesn't want to be like it. In Israel, that it's adversarial, as opposed to you could in fact be praising someone just because they're worthy of praise, not because you're trying to flatter them.
It depends on the context of the conversation, though, because that's a view that I had too. Like, why? This is great to be flattered. I want to flatter people when I'm talking to them also. But it is a strategy when you're trying to get someone to do something that they may not want to do. is to highlight the things that they're good at, right?
I get it. I guess my worry is that this model of negotiation is an adversarial model rather than many people have a model that's a relational model. And in fact, if I'm your boss, I don't want to give you something you don't want to do, because if you're unhappy, then you're going to come bitch to me all the time or come find my office, and in the end, it will be bad for me and bad for you. So there's this, it's a model. Well, I know.
It's not a model.
It's not a model, and I agree with you, Bob, totally, that collaborative relational negotiation is a much better way to go, and we're going to talk about the strategy to make your negotiations turn into that. But I point well taken that this is adversarial, and I sit in these meetings that are adversarial when I ask for things, and you need to be prepared that that could happen, and that being quiet, not going to the basement, and asking some questions can help you get out of it and still be friends. Okay, so here's a hypothetical case. There's a 33-year-old senior associate in infectious diseases who's a clinician researcher in the second year of her KOH. She's an associate program director for the fellowship and runs an annual research retreat. She does 10 weeks of consults at the VA and the University Hospital. And in her annual review, she wants to ask for more protected time and maybe a raise. Sound reasonable? What do you need to know? For the bosses in the room, sounds reasonable? Or who knows? Why don't you know? It depends. How much time does she have currently, right? So prepare. How much time does she have currently? What's the current salary? What do other people who are working in the department or the division similarly have? What's the national benchmark? She needs to know all of those things before she goes into that meeting. Maybe who's going to cover that protected time? What are the boss's interests? Of course the boss wants her to be successful transitioning her KOA to an R01, right? Every boss wants that, right? Okay. So, and of course they want her to continue to do the fellowship retreat and the research thing. But what are the service needs? How many staff do they have? Is there a hiring freeze right now? There's a lot of questions that she needs to understand before going into that annual review. Or she's going to feel like if the answer is no, they don't like me, Darth Vader is my boss. Okay, my father. So what's her value? What are some of the other things that she brings to the table that are hidden? Not just the stuff that's on paper that's happening. You know, maybe she's a great mentor for some of the other junior fellows. Maybe she teaches in the medical school. Are those values that the boss sees as valuable? Maybe he doesn't want any of that stuff. All he wants is her to be a K to R. So those things are not valuable to him. Don't bring them up. How might her boss challenge this request? What are anticipate the things that he might say, he or she might say about this? Gosh, I don't have the time to give that to you. You need to stop doing some of the other things that you're doing, might be what he says. I agree with you, you're doing too much. I agree with you, you're doing too much. I'd like for you to give up that retreat that you teach. Be sure that she's willing to give up some of the things that are important to her when she goes in. So anticipating how the boss might have other solutions and be prepared to discuss those. What's the way to make this a communal and collaborative negotiation? So back to Bob's point, how do we turn this into something that's not adversarial? She's nervous. There's a power differential here. There may be some goals that he has. The yes and. Yes, I like being in this division and doing this work, and I want to transition my K to an R. Maybe I need an extra research tech if I'm going to keep doing this much. Not the salary necessarily. Gosh, gee whiz, could I have an extra bench because I have a medical student who's doing a project with me now and there's not enough space in the lab? What are the kinds of things that she can do? I want to keep teaching that course, but I can't teach it this year. Is it okay if I mentor one of the fellows to teach it and then I come back the second year? So being creative and collaborative to make sure that they're achieving the same goals. And then how would this change if there was another job offer? Somebody who's coming in straight to their annual review in the middle of their K is actually really not that much of a threat to leave, because currently 75% of their salary is tied to their K award, and that's tied to a mentor likely at the institution. So sounds like they're doing a great job. They're super valuable, but they're not really a flight risk unless they're going to stop doing what they're doing. So how would that change if there was another job offer? Yeah?
About knowing your goals, the statement, she wants to ask for more commitment time and maybe a raise. So there's two things on the table. They seem different in value. And then the strategy of asking some people to do less to get paid more. I mean, that seems.
I actually put that in there for a reason, the maybe a raise. Because the maybe a raise comes from that question, so obviously this is not totally hypothetical. When I came back from the AAMC with the K award, and I talked to my neighbor who had asked for a raise and gotten one 3 times already from his division, I was shocked because I thought, like, well, how can you get a raise? You're like just a junior faculty member. You're not doing anything. He didn't have a grant. I had a grant that was paying my salary, most of my salary actually, because I was making 100 and it paid 75. And so what was that? That made me think like, oh, maybe I should be asking for a raise. So I put that in there as a sort of like, what's the perspective that you have about that? Does he want the money or not? Is that really a goal? It wasn't really a goal, but I thought he asked for a raise, so I should be asking for a raise. What about that perspective if I'm asking to do less, but I want more? What do men think about that?
If that other person hadn't gotten a raise, you would ask for a raise. So often we confuse feeling appreciated with money, because money is the metric
that is used. Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
I'm not sure there's anything wrong with it. I'm just pointing out that, well, I do think there's something wrong with it because it's a never win battle.
Right.
Somebody always is going to get more than you do, and if your self-worth is dependent on what other people are, it's like. So,
But I'm going to echo the sentiments of the junior faculty in the room and say, but you don't want to be a schmuck.
Right. Society values people based on certain things, and one of those things is money. And if you don't give it in your head, you can be a schmuck. You can be a softie.
Right.
Nobody wants to be a softie.
Right. Don't be a softie. So debrief with yourself. Step 3 is to debrief with yourself after you're done. How well did you prepare? What did you learn about the other person's goals? I'll tell you, with that analytical boss that I had, no negotiation was the only one time. It was a follow-up email and another conversation in the hall and another meeting scheduled and maybe 3 months later. What did you learn about the other person's goals? So remember, it's a learning activity to be in there. It's not the last time. You're learning something about what they want and what you can contribute. That's an opportunity. What else can I contribute? What impact did the process have on the relationship you have? Did you ask questions and listen effectively? What are their limitations and their priorities? And did you keep your emotions in check? What strategies did they maybe use to derail you while you were in there? So step 4 is to follow up and prepare again. So summarize the results and then start over with the preparation. No means a lot of things. It doesn't mean no necessarily. It might mean not today because I can't right now. It might be maybe. It might mean I'm thinking about it. And sometimes it actually means no. If no means no, then think about and. Okay, you said no, which means I say, yes, I'll do that. And I understand we can't do X right now, and I want to prepare to accomplish our goals in another way. What can I do differently? Okay, the last few minutes here, the elephant in the room. And I'll say that money comment feels like part of the elephant in the room. So I love this cartoon. Only Alan was prepared to acknowledge the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that gender differences are real. This talk is not about women in negotiation, but there's a lot of literature being published about that. The person who should be giving this talk today is probably Linda Babcock, who's at CMU right down the street. Men and women pay the same amount for cars on the internet, but not face-to-face, unless you want a tutorial from me and Edmunds.com. The wage gap for women and men nationally, we've seen those quotes, can be 75 to 77% or so, 25%. They do different, there's a lot of reasons for that. They do different jobs. They don't ask. So in the study that Linda Babcock and Sarah Lakshaver did, they found that 56% of men negotiated when they got their new job, and only 7% of women did in that same situation. So if you corrected this, the difference in their salaries was 7.5%, not 75%, in this group of MBA type folks. So the result also can be that they've not been moving up the ladder for whatever reason. A really nice example that people give is, what does $7,000 make? So if you're paying $100,000 for one person, and that 7% difference in negotiation is $7,000. The other person makes $7,000. I don't want to stake my reputation on $7,000, but over a 35-year career, that can add up to be $1 million worth of subsequent raises, savings, retirement, college for your kids. So maybe not worth it at that very moment, but in the long haul, it makes a big difference. So men and women are viewed differently. The styles of communication are different. We all know that. And representative negotiation works for women. Basically, any kind of negotiation works for men. So this I was obviously interested in. It was published in 2015 in the American Journal of Medicine. It's a study of program directors. It comes from Aptum and their survey of program director salaries. The orange color here is women. The blue color is men. And these are salaries of residency program directors in internal medicine. I was obviously interested. So here on the blue side, you can see the skew. You just look at the mode here and see that women is 175 to 200 and men is 200 to 225. So a $25,000 difference for people doing the same job, controlled for rank, controlled for hours per week, and controlled for publications. So what do Girl Scouts have to do with negotiating? So Linda Babcock actually made a Girl Scout badge, and I'll show you it in a minute. Men are 4 times more likely to negotiate than women about any conversation. Styles that people want women to behave are carefully and cooperatively. Men can behave however they want, and that's true of both women and male bosses. Female bosses will negotiate with men and appreciate the way that they negotiate, whether they're aggressive or collaborative or any of the styles that we mentioned. For women, negotiating with women, only the collaborative, cooperative, careful style is appreciated. And that's the same for men with women as well. Again, these are generalizations, but actually backed up in some pretty good social science data and repeated. So the badge that they made is this Girl Scout badge called Win-Win, where they actually teach little girls in Pittsburgh how to negotiate. You have to be a junior Girl Scout to do that. There are things you can do, so you don't have to. So you do need to negotiate in a collaborative way and not an aggressive way, because the literature shows that that's what works. So don't do the way that doesn't work. Do what the literature says works. So prepare and practice even more. Be ready so that you keep your basement in check. Stay out of the basement. Be patient. Frame things in that representative way. That means, what are we going to do? How can I do this with you? Stay engaged. Ask questions. There's another study that showed that people who are super negotiators ask 20 times more questions than people who are not super negotiators. I don't know exactly how you're defined as a super negotiator, but they ask more questions in the process about what's going on. Focus on the we and what you can give. And don't be frustrated. I added this. I didn't see this anywhere else. But don't be frustrated that you have to do things this way. This message is just for the women in the room. So many times I hear well, why is it that we have to negotiate differently than men? That's not fair. I don't like that. I don't want to have to do it. I wish I didn't have. Don't play to win. Play to have the best job and the life that you want to have, and do what works. The literature says this works. So negotiate collaboratively, and don't be frustrated that you have to do things that way. Advice for bosses and men. Men ask and women don't. Know this. The data support it. Know it. So ask women things. Pay attention to the number of times people are asking. Dr. Babcock mentioned a class that she was teaching. Her junior faculty came to her and said, how come you only have male TAs teaching these courses? And she said, I don't know. They're the only people who ever asked me to teach it. None of the women had asked. She just gave it to whoever asked her. Realize that differences exist. Ask the women around you for their opinions and their experiences. Have you ever had somebody demean you, put you in the basement, call you names, criticize you, or try to flatter you to get you to do something that you didn't want to do? Tell me about how that made you feel, and make sure that you're not doing it. Adjust your decisions and give opportunities, and beware of the bias. So in summary, I think you should be prepared and assess. Practice, know yourself and your goals, and pack yourself in a win-win presentation. Think about more than salary. In fact, think about almost everything else but salary. Be honest and stay at the table because it's a process. And then one other piece of advice that I got was a definition of success. And it was a man that was telling me this, that his definition of success was being happy about wherever he was going when he turned the engine on in his car. So this is a picture of the Highland Park Bridge. And sometimes I turn on my car and I'm heading to the best job that I can imagine. And I love the job that I have in the morning when I drive across the Highland Park Bridge. And my residents, the chief residents, are a big part of that. And then at the end of the day, I get in my car and I turn on the engine and I'm driving back across the Highland Park Bridge because I have an awesome family and I love the things that I do in my neighborhood and with my kids in our community. And I love that they picked this cartoon for me for Mother's Day that says, Happy Mother's Day to Supermoms everywhere. See, I told you. There's a Superman cape in the closet. So be happy with what you're doing and where you're going and focus on your negotiations in that way. Thanks. You're a businessman.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not negotiating. Do you mind if I say something? Maybe look at the title slide. I think there's a 2.
Oh,
Maybe
really?
I read it wrong. I
Oh, really?
apologize.
Yes, and two?
Yes, and then what?
Oh,
The
what
second
you bring?
sentence.
I missed something in
It's
there.
okay. No.
Okay.
It's not.